Gorla. Minister, I asked this question just in relation to the working group on the direct provision that has announced to have been established. What its makeup will be and when it's due to report back to the Minister. And I know that this has been raised in a couple of direct provision has been raised in a couple of questions previously, but unfortunately due to other meetings I wasn't able to be here, so hopefully there won't be too much repetition.
That's fine. Thank you, Deputy Pringle. The Government announced in its Statement of Government Priorities for 2014 to 2016 that there would be an independent working group to report to the Government on improvements within the protection process, including direct provision and supports for asylum seekers. I would hope to be in a position very shortly to announce a chair for that group. Minister Aona Reardon and myself have asked the working group to report very shortly. This is not a long-term working group. We would like to have a report from them within 3 to 4 months. And when I met with the NGOs last week, that was a point that we made. We want to have a focus on recommendations that can improve the system in the immediate term, in the short term, medium and longer term. That will go in parallel with the process of working on the legislation to introduce the single procedure. And the terms of reference are to look at what improvements can be made in the system. The working group will be made up of NGOs, representatives from government departments. It will be a mixture of NGOs and statutory bodies. And we held the roundtable last week with a view to discussing and informing the terms of reference of that working group and to see what the NGOs in particular felt should be the terms of reference for the group. So I would think within a matter of literally 2 or 3 weeks we will be naming the chairperson and announcing the terms of reference of the working group. And I would expect that they will report towards the end of this year, early part of next year. But as I say, it's a 3 to 4 month project. It's not a project that we want to take years. This is about focusing on the direct experience of the NGOs, what their suggestions are in relation to direct provision, and what can realistically and reasonably, what steps can be taken to improve the conditions under which people are living, while at the same time being very realistic, which I have been already here today about. I am warning about unrealistic high expectations about changing the system overnight. This is about accommodation for 4,500 people. The direct provision centres originally were put in place because of a homeless crisis where we had 9,500 people arriving in the country and there was no place for them to stay.
Thank you. Deputy Pringle.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for your response. And I think it is vitally important that the NGOs are represented on the working group, and I welcome the fact that they will be there. I think it's very important as well that the makeup of the group wouldn't be biased against the NGOs in terms of being weighted towards government departments, because I think that's going to be very important. The one thing I would be a bit worried about is that the terms of reference are to look at how the system can be improved. I don't believe that the system can be improved, and I think that the working group should be looking at what the alternatives should be as well to the direct provision system, and that's something that at the very least the report should lay out how we're going to achieve the alternative, because there's no doubt that the system hasn't worked and is causing very serious harm to a very large number of people. I've been involved in working with asylum seekers in direct provision since they came to Donegal Town in the year 2000, and the centre there thankfully has closed in the last couple of years, and I would like to see all the centres across the country closing, because I think that's the only fair and reasonable outcome that can come from any review that should take place. And so I think that we should not only be looking at improvements, we should be looking at alternatives as well. I would ask you to consider that in terms of the terms of reference for the working group.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. Well, obviously different countries around Europe take a variety of approaches to asylum seekers arriving on their shores, and the accommodation varies considerably, as you know. In some countries it's detention centres. In other countries people are allowed to look after themselves without really having any financial supports, and that's very difficult. That's the situation in a number of countries. In Ireland we do provide the full accommodation and the direct provision, as it's called. In terms of an alternative to that scheme, clearly that would have enormous resource implications. Clearly the group will look at they will report to the government on improvements with the protection process, including direct provision and supports for asylum seekers. I've no doubt that comments will be made along the lines that you have said and will be examined, Deputy Pringle, in terms of are there alternatives? Are there realistic alternatives? I know that the Immigrant Council for Ireland, for example, has made a point about people who have been identified as trafficked. And if I could conclude and just say, Amnesty have identified people who've been tortured, who are in the direct provision system. And I do think we should begin to examine those particular categories of people and begin to examine, are there alternatives from housing associations or elsewhere? But we do have housing difficulties in this country, and there are 4,500 people living in the direct provision centres, and I do want to make them as humane, obviously, as possible, and the conditions as humane, but it is a large number of people, and 40% more are arriving at present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. But you know, we provide shelter and food for prisoners as well in the state. You know, and I mean, in effect, I believe that that's what the direct provision system is a system of open prisons. It's a very detrimental system to anybody that has to live through it. And I think that we can, as a society, and should be able to, as a society, to absorb the 4,500 people in there who I know from personal experience all want to contribute to our society and are very highly qualified, very many of them, and very capable. I know one person personally who has been trying to enrol in a PhD course for the last number of years but hasn't been able to because of its status. And these are people who can contribute hugely, and I think we should recognise that as well, and the review should take that into account.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Very quickly, Minister.
Well, yes, look, Deputy, of course I agree with you that at a personal level and the individual stories, we do want to give people as much opportunity as possible while living in direct provision to avail of whatever services they can. That's why it's important that the children in particular are able to go to school, go to primary school, go to secondary school. The length of time is the real issue, I think, that is really making the situation very difficult for so many people. But certainly if we can deal with their applications more quickly, I think that's going to make quite a difference. And we will certainly be examining any other initiatives. I want to assure you of that. We will examine any other initiatives that we can take, and we'll act on as many of the recommendations as we can to improve the situation that people are currently facing. And I, of course, recognise the contribution, and I would like to see people being given an opportunity to make that contribution while they're in the direct provision system. And it may be that we can examine, you know, some training opportunities, some involvement in local communities that will begin to meet some of what you've described.